Hi, welcome to Xavier Health at Xavier University, and welcome to the October 3rd Thursday Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Michelle Rich, and I am the Associate Director of Program Development for Xavier Health. So welcome, and I'm so happy to have you here today. Of course, the goal of our Lunch and Learn series is to advance your awareness of the driving forces you manage every day so you can lead with wisdom that would otherwise take a career to gain. So what does that really mean? We bring topics to you that you normally don't think about and can increase your awareness of the things that impact your organization and influence the work you do each and every day. Our mission at Xavier Health is to inspire collaboration, lead innovation, and make a difference. We sometimes refer to the collaboration at Xavier as an uncommon because we bring FDA and industry together on neutral ground. And by breaking down the barriers, we work together to lead innovation. And this innovation allows us together to make a difference in global health. So thank you for joining us. I would like to point out that the Lunch and Learn series is just one of the programs that we lead. We are engaged with over 150 industry professionals and FDA officials in the various working teams, committees, and boards. Our focus is primarily in pharma and device. However, we often bring those two industries together through work such as our in-depth how-to cybersecurity summit, which is being held next week. Can't believe it's already next week. And also our AI summit and combination product summit. So our two FDA co-sponsored events, MedCon and PharmaLink, both occur in the spring. So we hope you can join us there at some point. But we also lead initiatives in a number of areas, including supply by design that you're going to be hearing about here very shortly, pharma and device metrics, artificial intelligence, new work in the last mile, and serialization. We are an institution of learning at Xavier, so it's fitting that we also offer ways in which you can engage in learning and developing. So congratulations to all of you who are joining us today. You're expanding your knowledge base. We also offer on-demand device training toolbox, and on February 1st, we're excited to be hosting a half-day web conference with regulators. But through all of our events and initiatives, we are inspiring collaboration, leading innovation, and making a difference. Before we begin, I would like to say that today's webinar is being recorded. The recording and slides will be available on our website soon after we're through. So please send your questions to me. If you look on your toolbar, you'll see a question tab in your GoToWebinar panel. Just send those to me. They won't distract Marla, and I will queue those up and ask at the end of the presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. It is my honor to work with and introduce Dr. Marla Phillips. Marla joined Xavier University in 2008 as Director of Xavier Health. And I just mentioned everything we do here at Xavier Health, and Marla is the inspiration and driving force of everything we do here. She began working in the pharmaceutical industry for Merck in 1996, where she took on roles of increasing responsibility, which eventually culminated into her position as Head of Quality of Operations at Merck, North Carolina facility. And she does hold a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from Xavier University and a PhD in organic chemistry from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So thank you so much for joining us, Marla.
No, thanks. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share our work with everyone.
That's great. So today we're going to be talking about beyond supplier relationship management, and we have a few questions queued up for you. So let's begin with our first question. So supplier relationship management has been in place for nearly 20 years, but yet industry still has blind spots throughout our incoming supply chains. We have risks that seemingly cannot be mitigated, and poor supply chain performance and risk to product quality. So what is the missing piece of the puzzle that prevents us from making strides in our supply chain operations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I love to answer because I've seen it for the past 20 years, dating back to when I was within Merck and trying to figure out how to move the needle. And anything we seem to try, maybe it moved the needle a little bit, but really not too much. And then a lot of times it often reverted back to where we were. So what's interesting, Michelle, I know you mentioned we have the pharma conference in March and the device conference in May at Xavier. And when we first started those back in 2010, they were 6 weeks apart. And, I'd sit there and listen to what was being said and be participating. And then 6 weeks later, we'd hear the device industry. And I was thinking, gosh, that sure sounds familiar. And then the next year, the same thing. We'd hear the pharma, what are the challenges and struggles? And then 6 weeks later, we'd hear device. I'm like, okay, we're obviously struggling with the same thing. Let's bring these two industries together. And what we found when we first came together was the thought was related to the supply chain, that there was this big fear, and it still, I believe, exists today, that there are so many blind spots in our supply chain that our company's name could be in the paper tomorrow. And the last thing we want to do is to hurt anyone. So when we got together in 2012, the thought was, my gosh, how do we fix this? Our suppliers are causing so many problems. What can we do? And a lot of the focus was on how can we certify our suppliers. And I remember that meeting because I was thinking, oh my gosh, how can we certify, millions of suppliers in every continent, every language, everywhere in the world, and certify their operations. So as I said, that really is interesting. But instead of jumping to the solution, what if we look at the root cause first and then go from there? And so I took the team through a process of gap analysis of what did they think was broken or breaking down in their supply chain. And then we put that into a cause and effect matrix, Pareto analysis. And at the end of it, so this is through the winter, at the end of it, what we found is all of their own data pointed to themselves. And it literally, instead of our suppliers are causing the problems, it was like, oh my gosh, we're causing the problems. And at best, we're not preventing the problems. So this paradigm shift was just earth shattering. You could hear a pin drop when we presented this back to the team. And the team, I should mention, when we started this in 2012 and still today, we had FDA involved. So Steve Solomon and Pete Beckerman from the Office of the Commissioner were on the team. We had pharma representatives and device representatives. So this team that we went through this process with is the one I'm referring to. And so what we found from this is basically the missing piece of the puzzle was the true root cause. So we've been trying to fix the left side of the equation year after year after year, and we forget that there's a right side of the equation. So even in the term supplier relationship management, we forget that we're part of that relationship, and we only focus on our partner. So now there's some of that where we do scorecards and things like that, but generally the feeling was we've got to fix the supplier. And so this paradigm shift has allowed us to generate some solutions that are really making a difference and can actually move the needle. So it was very exciting when this happened, because we can fix ourselves a lot easier than we can fix a million suppliers all over the world. So it's actually very empowering as well. And one thing we found as we've presented this all over the country for the past 4 years at some of the biggest conferences, people saying just understanding this paradigm shift changed the way they operate. So even if we didn't have solutions, just knowing that, okay, I've got to think of what risk am I inducing into this process instead of, what risk does my supplier have? So that alone can change the way you operate, even if you did nothing else. So that is the missing piece of the puzzle, was the true root cause.
Well, that's a huge revelation, and I'm sure the suppliers also are excited to hear that there's some recognition there. Do you feel that the suppliers feel the GSPs improve their relationships with the manufacturers?
Yeah, and let me go back to the slide. So it's interesting because at this point we only had the manufacturers involved, because we felt if we were going to try to figure out how to certify suppliers, we thought maybe they might not be as interested in that as much as after July, when we said, you know what, we recognize that we're part of the equation. Do you want to join us and help us resolve this together? So in the summer of 2013, we actually did a survey of suppliers and then had a focus group session at one of our meetings that Eli Lilly hosted. And it was fantastic. So we did not miss the elephant in the room when we assessed ourselves and did the gap analysis. And the suppliers corroborated our responses of the things that we were either circumventing our own systems or we didn't have processes in place. And they were all related to even understanding our own product and the materials going into our product and their variability. It was in how do we develop our supply chain, and then how do we manage our supply chain. So those were the 3 themes of gaps that we identified of ourselves, and the suppliers corroborated all of that. And then from that point forward, they formally joined the team. So they're creating the solutions with us instead of, we're going to go off and do it on our own.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned earlier that, it was a major paradigm shift. So in order to improve, that's sometimes a huge requirement. So can you please share, we'll go to the next question, 3 new action-provoking concepts that could help us shift our paradigms and how we approach our supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when we started in 2012, we didn't even know what we would be coming up with. And we were asked, are you developing a guidance document? What are you doing? We're like, well, we don't know yet because we haven't found the root cause. And then once we found the root cause, it's like, okay, what is this going to look like? Is it a guidance document? And again, the litany of possibilities went down the row. So we started really diving into this, and it started to form on its own. And as we take a step back now, we actually realized that we identified 3 new concepts that aren't in existence. And those concepts, which I'll describe a little bit in detail, are the following. Supply by design. So we're familiar with quality by design, but once you develop your product using a quality by design framework, it was kind of like, well, now let's toss it into our supply chain. So the supply by design is an intentional design of your supply chain, just like quality by design has the design space and the intentional studies you do to ensure the quality of your product. The other one was self-qualification. We're really good at saying, we've got supplier qualification and we're assessing risk and we're having performance review meetings. But again, if we remember the right side of that equation I was just showing you, if we're part of inducing risk into our own supply chain based on our processes and practices, then how qualified are we to be in any relationship? So we have a self-qualification. And then the third one is relationship risk. Looking at the overall relationship instead of just everything in isolation. So again, supply by design, you're familiar with the quality by design concept. And what we're seeing in a typical day in the supply chain on the right-hand side is you've got competing priorities and they're all going in different directions and sometimes in conflict with each other. So the supply by design concept has this natural overlap and integration with quality by design. So you take the careful work you did to design your product and you make sure that you maintain the quality of the product throughout the supply chain until it reaches your patient or your customer. So it's integrated risk reduction by working hand in hand with intentional design. So that was the first concept. The second one, as I mentioned, the self-qualification. Most, if not all, of the solutions we developed, and there's 12 of them, have a scoring mechanism, and they're very practical. And the design of our work is to give you tools that will help you make the right decision for you and your product. So the self-qualification, here's an example. There's 4 sections to it. This is just 4 of the questions in the product and process technical capability section. And there's only 26 questions total. So it's not like this onerous type of process. And you would just score 0, 3, 7, or 10, how well you're doing with, for example, our process control ranges and product spec ranges are actually supported by data or have scientifically sound justification. We found in understanding our own product and process that we might not have the data to support what we're doing. So here's just an example. You go through and you would score yourself, and it's based out on categories, and then you could see which categories you were weaker in or stronger in, and then dive deeper in there, and then have mitigation plans for each of the categories based on your scoring. So self-qualification was that second new concept. And then the third concept was relationship risk. And again, one thing that we found interesting is, first of all, we typically only have supplier qualification. Again, you might get the two-way scorecards going on or have review meetings where they're giving you feedback, but you have to ask yourself how deep that is, how willing are they to maybe in their eyes put their relationship at risk if they really share, what kind of a partner you are. So so typically you just have, you're looking at your supplier risk. Now introducing self-qualification. If you don't score yourself honestly, then you're only hurting yourself. But you now have self-risk. Again, that can give you very interesting information, but it isn't until you overlay the two and you see where your supplier is strong, where you're strong, where your supplier's weak and you're weak, and then every iteration in between. And that can help you understand to a more granular level what kind of risk you have in that relationship. So that's the third brand new concept that we developed, and it's very exciting. So that those concepts are part of solutions, and like I said, we have 12 solutions in total.
So Marla, you mentioned and you talked about self-qualification as part of these new concepts that can be applied, but how can regulators use this type of program or the GSPs?
Right. So regulators, if you could see the solutions in a little bit more detail, one example is for the supplier qualification, we made it more robust, and we look at factors that most quality people aren't even thinking of. One of my favorite questions in that, because I know I never would have thought of this back when I was in industry, was to ask if our supplier, like how important it is that our supplier is not a competitor of ours. I mean, I wouldn't even have thought of that business relationship, like our supplier could actually be a competitor. But if you're working with a cross-functional team, you can say, you know what, in this particular case, 0, 3, 7, or 10, it's a 10. That supplier cannot be a competitor of ours, that this is proprietary information and we have to share it with our supplier in order to make what we need, but we can't let our competitors know. Other cases, like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's, maybe it's just a regular raw material and, it's no big deal. But to even ask that question and to have the dialogue is something that is very fascinating with the solutions. So now the regulators can go in and say, can you share with us, your procedure for doing supplier selection, and what risk elements do you assess? And if it's like your typical, handful of quality-related risk assessments, then they'll know that you're not really looking at the broader scope. They could say, well, what risk or what process do you have? Because they can't ask you for your self-audit, but what process do you have to assess your own risk? And so they can ask these questions to see if you've got a robust process in place.
Great. Well, so you mentioned that in the supply by design, there are real 12 practical solutions that can be implemented right away in a company. But if you had to pick only 3 solutions to highlight, which ones would you choose? And can you describe what these solutions are?
Yeah, and it is hard actually, because a lot of these are really neat. And like I said, they have these scoring mechanisms and they're very hands-on and easy to use. But I would have to say the first one is the cross-functional team formation. And the reason for that is every solution we have, we suggest that you do with a cross-functional team and you gain alignment. Not you do a handoff. So quality does their part and procurement does their part. It's actual formation of the team and you align around what's important. So here's an example from the cross-functional team solution. Imagine if you have a spreadsheet like this and going down the left-hand column are like 17 different functional groups. The first column says, what examples are there that this functional group needs from the supplier by the functional area? So what do they need to know about the supplier that you're assessing in part of this process? So EH&S, for those of you who aren't familiar, is environmental health and safety. So it gives you examples of what they need to understand about the supplier before you choose them. The next column is, what are some examples that environmental health and safety can contribute to your supplier selection process? And, it's interesting to think, and I hadn't thought about this, was environmental health and safety, they can look at publicly available information that your typical quality person isn't looking for. Maybe you're about to choose a supplier who's about to be shut down for stack emission violations or OSHA violations. I mean, you just don't know. The other aspect is oftentimes you go and do an audit of your supplier, but perhaps that particular supplier has horrible cross-contamination procedures, and you could be putting your own employees at risk. So this is actually very important information to understand. So instead of saying, if I'm in quality and I'm saying, well, do I want to involve them or not? Is that important enough or not? We suggest in the next column, go ask EH&S if they feel that their involvement has been missed. And if it hasn't been missed, have they been involved at the right time? So go ask them instead of you saying, yeah, we probably don't need to involve them. I can go look up that data myself. So again, it fosters the dialogue. And then at the last column, we ask, what's the likelihood you're going to involve them? And you guys might decide, no, we don't need to formally involve them, but now we know 3 questions to ask for. And when we do X, Y, and Z, we'll let them know. Or you could say, yeah, they have to be a full part of the team. So it helps you make the right decision for your company. But importantly, you get the right people at the table. So going forward, when you're selecting your supplier, when you're looking at material requirements, whatever it is you're doing, that team is aligning around what's important. So that has to be the first solution that I would share if I had to pick three, because it is the foundation for all the other solutions we have. So the next one is, yeah.
I'm sorry, Marla. I just wanted to remind anyone, if they had, I'm so sorry for interrupting, but just if anyone has any questions about any one of these solutions, please do send those questions through your chat box.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so then the supplier engagement is the second solution. And what I have here is just, it's kind of a blurry snapshot because it was taken out of Visio, I think. But basically it shows, as you're looking at the product life cycle from discovery through late phase development and then eventually on the market, what is the supplier relationship state? And then the next swim lane, if you want to think of these as swim lanes, shows some of our solutions. So the cross-functional team formation, it shows you that, aligning around material requirements, the initial material selection criteria being established, having evaluations of the materials, evaluating the supplier, selecting the supplier, and so on. All of these are done, it shows you when it could occur in the product life cycle, but each company is a little different. That's why it's a sliding bar. But you'll see that the cross-functional team formation is first, as I was just talking about, but then you engage your supplier. If you notice, it's not all the way over to the left. We don't say, yeah, you know, the best thing to do is engage your supplier from the very beginning. That's not a good plan, because you don't even know what you think you need yet. So you need to form that team, gain alignment around what you think you need, and then you engage the supplier in a meaningful way. And you engage the supplier because you've had that cross-functional team discussion, and you can choose a short list of suppliers that make sense now, and everyone can, you know, live with. You know, there has to be give and take. Everyone's going to have a number one priority from their different functional groups, but you're aligning as a team around that. Then you engage the supplier in a meaningful way, and you view them as the subject matter experts that they are of their own materials. So when I look at supplier engagement, you know, if you look at this next slide, where in today's model, we do a lot of cross-functional handoffs, and somehow a supplier gets selected. It might be, gosh, we've used this supplier forever with this material, we'll just use them for this product, I'm sure it'll be the same. Or we've used them for a different material, but they're a phenomenal supplier, they happen to make this other material, I'm sure it'll be just as good. Whatever happens, you've all of a sudden got a supplier in your supply chain. And then once the product's on the market, you spend your time with performance reviews. Maybe there's poor performance and failures, and you're dealing with corrective actions, and that's where a lot of time is spent. If you follow the supplier engagement process and you get that cross-functional alignment up front, you engage the supplier in a way that really brings value to the process. You intentionally select a supplier with alignment from the cross-functional team. And then once it's on the market, you're dealing with really fun things, improvement ideas, preventative actions. Maybe you're recognizing, hey, we can invest in our supplier in a specific way, or they're giving you suggestions, and it's just a much better experience. So it's an ongoing engagement, but it starts up early in the process before you actually select the supplier. So that's the second solution that I would share, because it really makes a meaningful difference. We have companies doing feasibility studies with this, and this one is one that is consistently being called out as, my gosh, we're not really doing this. And when they've done it, they've actually changed decisions on what they thought they were going to do. So then the third one, I mentioned the relationship risk, and I showed, you know, that heat map kind of risk diagram. But really, the output from our work is more of a spider diagram, so it's granular. So looking at this, your self-score might be in red, and so what this is showing is the higher the number, the better you are. So it's, you know, you're stronger in those areas. We have 4 categories for self-qualification and the initial selection criteria for suppliers, and they're the same 4 categories, different questions. We pull out specific questions from those categories to map against each other. And so in this example, you can see my own quality and regulatory compliance is a little bit low. My relationship alignment is low. And some of the questions in that category are things like, what's my ability to forecast? Or, you know, am I a horrible partner in this relationship? And I'm constantly changing my orders and really tossing their business model all over the place. So that's an example. Now, if you look at supplier 1 in blue, you can see, wow, they are really strong in quality and regulatory compliance. And that's typically where we are when we are assessing our suppliers. So you would say, great, let's go with them. But when you see the relationship alignment and you see that they've got a pretty low score, their scoring in that category is related to, do they have capacity and flexibility and other aspects. But again, if as I just described, not so good at forecasting and they don't have capacity and inventory and flexibility, they could be fantastic in quality and regulatory compliance, but we're not going to have a product on the market. So you might say that, looking at this granular level, you could say, okay, this is not going to be a good fit for us for this particular product. The supplier number 2, they're not so strong in quality and regulatory compliance, but yet their relationship alignment is very strong. So you might say, okay, in this particular case, we're going to go with supplier 2 because they can actually support us and be on the market. But now I recognize that I'm going to have to invest in their people, processes, and equipment in order to get their quality and regulatory compliance up to where it needs to be. So, that's just an example of the dialogue that could occur, but that's what I just wanted to explain. This level of granularity will actually help you make the right decision for you. And one of the companies involved in our feasibility study actually had to change their supplier selection process when they got to this level. They were about to go in the wrong direction and would have just had one event after another occurring with trying to keep their product on the market. So it's very, very powerful. And the fact that you're even having dialogues is fantastic. So that would be the third one that I would share.
That is excellent and very, very insightful. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I forgot the slide was here. For those of you who aren't familiar with the work, as I mentioned, it's been going on since 2012. It's been a very robust process. We followed what's called DMADV, which is similar to DMAIC, but you follow DMADV when you are creating something new and you have to validate it. We've had 5 countries involved, 44 companies, 2 different industries, along with FDA. The 3 new concepts that I shared today, 12 practical solution tools that are very practical, like you saw in the ones I shared. And then again, that one paradigm shift that can really transform the way your company operates. So it's been very exciting work to see at the end of this time, we've really come out with something that can make a difference.
That is fantastic. And I think we have time for just a couple of questions. So I'll ask you the first one. How can a small company implement these solutions with so few resources?
Great question. So a small company, we've actually had them involved in the feasibility study. And of these 44 companies that have been involved in developing the solutions, we made sure that we had small companies, large companies, suppliers, contract manufacturers, branded, generic. We wanted to make sure we had a well-rounded perspective. But for a small company, what we have found is that they can take, especially that cross-functional alignment tool, and get the right team together to have the discussions, and then they can implement it in a way that makes sense for them. So they can take the initial selection criteria for the suppliers and look at all the different risk elements and align around them, and then perhaps take one of their products and assess if the suppliers they have in place already were the right decisions, and if not, then they can start to build out mitigation plans that they can schedule out over time in a way that makes sense for them. The other thing is, one of the companies in the feasibility study never had product on the market. So this was, they were actually looking for good supply practices that they could use as they're developing their supply chain, and they were able to use it to help guide them in selecting the right suppliers. So this really is very, very scalable, because if you remember when I said earlier, we have never said in any of this that you have to do this, you have to do that. It's here's the information, and we want this to foster the right decision for you, your company, and it could be a different decision for every product you have, but you're making the right decisions.
That's great. Well, and then on the opposite side, Marla, I have a question. Like, what about large companies who have really complex systems?
Yeah, great question. So I just presented this work with William Kovac, who is the vice president at Roche, and he actually shared, he matched the good supply practices with their operations and showed what they were already doing, what they were doing partially, and where the gaps were. And his thought process was to take a product and go through it and tear it down. so that they could start demonstrating how it works and the return on investment. And then also any new product that they were going to come out with, they were going to start from scratch with the good supply practices. That was their model. You know, when you have very, very large companies, you can't say, we're going to change the way we're doing everything. And I mean, it's like moving a mountain. So starting small and having these small wins can help demonstrate how to do it, and then just keep expanding wider and wider is one possible way, or just start any new product you have. The other thing that's really cool is you can use this to assess your legacy supply chains. So with your lifecycle management review, you can take out these tools and get a cross-functional team together to assess a specific supply chain for one of your products. Maybe it's your high priority product and you don't want it to miss a single split second on the market. And you look at that and just help identify if there's risks that you weren't aware of. But it can help you do basically like the performance review of your supply chain that's already in existence.
That's awesome. What a fantastic tool. And someone had asked the question to repeat the name of the initiative. So it's the Supply by Design initiative, right? And the outcome of that was the GSPs, or good supply practices.
Right. So, yeah, and I have to admit, they've been kind of interchangeable. It's the good supply practices, it's Supply by Design. As you can see from the logo we've developed, that's really the heart of it, is Supply by Design, an intentional design of your supply chain. And the solutions are the good supply practices. So it can go by either, but because it has in the past year as this has evolved, we will be finalizing our work at the end of this year. If anyone on the call wants to take any solutions for a test run, we'd be happy to meet with your company, give you they're basically spreadsheets, so they're scoring tools that you can use. You can try one. We have 6 of them that are in feasibility studies. You can try 1 or 6. But if you try them, the one that you have to do is the cross-functional team formation, because it requires the team to do the others. So if that helps.
Right, and I have folks who would like to know where they can get more information about this. Is this something where they would just reach out to us here at Xavier Health, you, Marla, or myself, to ask the question and then we can connect them, or is there some other reference that? And
yep. So on our Xavier Health website, we have top navigation. One of the top navigation buttons is initiatives. And so you can click on that and go to the web page, and it has background information and things like that. We're actually very actively in the process of updating that with even more information, like videos and tools. So that website is kept current as we can get it. But then also, if you just want to reach out to us directly, we'd be happy to have a phone call with you, talk with your team, send you information, answer questions. We're just a little passionate about this work, so I'd be happy to talk with anyone who's interested.
That's great. Well, I think we've run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for sharing these insights from this work. It's incredible work, and thank you for giving practical solutions that we can implement them today for better outcomes tomorrow. So for those listening in, thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you'll join us for the third Thursday Lunch and Learn scheduled for November 16th. And just so you know, October is Cybersecurity Month, so we look forward to seeing some of you next week at Xavier for the Cybersecurity Summit. And we want to thank you so much and hope you all have a wonderful day.